has anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country.
Georgian townhouses on the moon, the highest GDP per capita in the Milky Way. Small modular reactors under every village green. This is Anglo-futurism.
Listeners, welcome back. We are in the King Charles III space station with Shiv Malik.
And as the most youthful and angry,
not by that much,
angry young man here, Shiv, you've been talking about this problem of lack of houses and the entrenched position of certain areas or sections of society. Why do you think that now we're having these kind of discussions or these kind of arguments? Why is LFG able to bring a whole load of nerds out on a Thursday evening in a way that this was not necessarily, or was it happening in the 2010s, say?
No, it definitely wasn't happening then. There was this sort of a year and a half period, if you want, of kind of protest. And so I released my book in September 2010, and then literally like a week or two later, there were student protests, which ran for several months. And at times, people faced sort of real violence and pushback from the police. And that kind of radicalized a lot of people. You actually had the Occupy movement that kind of came basically just a little bit earlier than that. You had various other protest movements, and then the end of that happened when there were what came known as the English riots or London riots, if you want, in the summer of 2011. And then after that, if you want, there was sort of no more upswell of kind of popular on the streets movements, and there was very little also in the way of organized kind of politics when it came to these material circumstances and changing material circumstances in that way, right?
Because actually probably what we had that, and then there was basically very little until then sort of Me Too, BLM, and those were the next kind of big movements, but as you say, they weren't material.
No, they weren't. Then when they were, I've had lots of theories. So let me put this in a kind of more concrete way. I went on these book tours to promote the book, but it stretched on for about 5 years. And I did talks at, the OECD. I got invited to speak at the Sydney Opera House with my co-author. But the vast majority of these things were in towns in England and Scotland, etc. Just, going and talking about the book.
Do you want to just say what the book was about?
Yeah,
just
so
for people who don't know.
Right. It was called Jilted Generation, and it was ostensibly saying if we don't, as a country, grapple with this housing crisis, and remember, this is 2010, so we're actually using 2008 numbers and before that, but you could see the writing was already on the wall. It was just there. We've got a housing crisis, we've got an infrastructure problem, and a pensions problem, etc., etc. So it's kind of, but millennials are going to feel the pain of all of this if we don't do something now. So that was the basic theory of the book. It was going to be called, The Rolling Stones Must Die, because I thought there was also a cultural problem, why it was that...
You'd go to prison if you tweeted that now.
Yeah, you would. Why was it that, the Rolling Stones were kind of headlining Glastonbury? It would be kind of appalling to think that, Woodstock would be headlined by some kind of skiffle band, right, from 50 years prior. So why the hell were they doing this? And everyone was going, oh, wow, it's amazing, the Rolling Stones. You're like, this should be completely passé and old-fashioned, and yet it still feels a little bit fresh, and that should be worrying for us, massively worrying, that we've kind of culturally atrophied in that way, that these people are still on stage and still fashionable and still selling tickets, right? So that's what the book was about. And when I went to these on book tour and turned up to talk to people about what it was, the audience was filled almost to a T with boomers, right? With people who basically kind of retired and maybe, yes, had time to go to book events. about a third of the boomers would be like chest beating, going, "Oh, it's terrible, self-flagellating. We've done a terrible thing here, and you're right." And then the other 2/3 of the audience were basically boomers going, "You just want to kill us all off, and we should just commit suicide now. Then you'll be happy." And very emotive, right? And I was like, actually, it's not about you at all. Like, it's not about boomers. This book is about us, right? It's about how millennials are really not going to be faring well. What there weren't in the audience, well, there clearly wasn't there. The people who weren't there in numbers were millennials. And my age, I thought they would come out because the book's about them, right? So what were my theories at that time, at least? And maybe they still pertain today to an extent. And I don't know if any of these things are right. And the first one was, okay, the people see it as a personal failure. And they haven't realized it's systemic. And so they don't want to talk about the fact that, well, I haven't earned enough money, I haven't got a good enough job, and that's why I can't afford a home, I can't start a family. Like, it's my fault, right? And I think we got a lot of that anyway, because I'd interview people, working in The Guardian, doing some of these stories anyway. And people would say that, and then kind of want to say, no, this is systemic. It's the system that it's a fault, right? Then I think that kind of falls away after time, because you think like, okay, well, you've had years and years of messaging saying it is systemic, and yet nothing really changed. Then I think maybe our generation was too well educated, right, for their own damn good. And, it was not intellectual enough a problem to complain about the rent, right? Whereas Me Too and trans rights and Palestine, they've got, great bodies of theory. You learn about them at uni anyway, and you can read books about it. But the rent, that's very prosaic, right? That's, I'm a degree educated person. I can't complain about the rent, right? It's not enough meat to it. Maybe it's that. I don't know. I've never worked it out. But what you can say is that in this moment now, something seems to have twigged with LFG and that being a huge galvanizer. And I think clearly things have got so bad for so long that we can't go on. And people have I think something's just snapped in just a good enough a number of people.
Do you get that sense from people in power as well as the sort of blue caps NIMBYs whom you might meet at LFG events?
I was told during this, in the kind of before we launched the idea of the city, we did a good recce of having conversations with people right at the top of infrastructure and taking those decisions and housing. Some pretty prominent people, if I kind of reveal their names, you'd be like, oh, wow, okay. And the two things that really stuck with me from this one specific person was this building a city is not the kind of thing that I think we could do in 21st century Britain. And I was just appalled because by logic and the context of the conversation, clearly we did it in the 20th century with Milton Keynes, for example, and clearly we did it all the way through the 19th century, most of the North, just small towns, right, until they became cities. And I thought, God, really given up. That's terrible. What a terrible indictment. There's nothing in physics that says you can't do this, or engineering, or technology. It's just politics. And yet we're kind of giving up. We're like, the 21st century is not a thing we can do anymore, I guess. Let's just give up. And this is a major decision maker, right? The second thing they said was, and where's your generation? If you guys protested more about housing, that would make my job easier, right? Because the politicians would be going, we need to deliver housing because all these people are protesting about it. And I thought, yeah, he's right. Yeah. Or she.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, Tom, your book came out 2010.
Yes.
2010. I mean, Tom, what were you worried about in 2010?
2010. Well, I was at university in the early 2010s, and I sort of remember feeling vaguely animated by the Occupy protests, although not so much that I really attended any. I think I felt a vague sense of intergenerational unfairness, but no more than that. I think the question of why the young generation is so kind of supine is an interesting one. And I would argue that we've been sedated by social media.
Possibly. And I think
there's just less, there's just kind of, people don't go out like looking for things to do in the way that they might in a world where there are more young people and they are more irate and they do go more protests.
Or let me put it this other way, and then this is not anything original. It's been said by many people. Is actually social media has created very weak bonds, and seemingly kind of the rewards of progress and action on a political cause. But it's basically if you press a like button, I've done my bit. Right? That is not how political organizing has traditionally happened. You associate with people physically in their presence once or 2 times a week. You build bonds, and they're strong bonds. And 200 people who are strongly bonded like that are way more powerful than 1 million likes on a tweet, right? It's not going anywhere. So maybe that's another part of that element, right? It carries you forward when you've got those social bonds. But then, if young people are constantly moving around because they don't have a place, then that puts those people at a massive disadvantage. Right?
But also you cannot sort of solve Palestine for yourself as an individual here in the UK, but you can solve the housing crisis for yourself by knuckling down, getting a job. And not everyone can do this, right? But you can basically mean this isn't as much of a problem for you specifically.
There's a very good Atlantic article called "Educated Graduates Are the Useful Pawns of Capitalism," in that you have this problem where the most able organizers and the people most able to likely lead these tight-knit groups are the ones who get poached by 80-hour work weeks and then do get the houses. In that people talk about the sort happening of people of great talent actually do get rewarded for their abilities, and it means that it leaves us, Tom and I, as us pedestrian plodders, to without suitable leaders who might propel us to in our Rosencrantz, who the Hamlet characters?
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Exactly, that we could ploddingly walk behind these great leaders and be attendant lords to fill a scene or two.
Maybe to put it in a more prosaic sense, if you kind of ran this experiment, I feel like I can already feel like the heckles rising, which is to say, if you only had a choice to protest one thing over the next 15 years, would you choose Palestine or your rent in London, right? Or the housing situation, let's put it.
Well, as Tom was my landlord, that
got awkward fast.
I of course do feel extremely strongly about
I'm not sure which I'd be more annoyed about.
It's obviously a false choice, but for most people also maybe I like a weird Hobson's choice, right? But it shouldn't be like that in theory. I mean, it's, and I can feel like everyone just going, oh well, obviously I'd pick Palestine, and like in my generation, you think, oh, God, that's insane. Given how materially affected you are by housing, you can't have a family. Like, again, let me just say this way. Not very long ago, and this is why it makes me sort of an Anglo-futurist as opposed to some weird, mad city builder. Someone said, oh, but Shiv, you could be building the city in Indonesia and Bolivia. It's so much easier. I was talking to a Brit who's actually out trying to, do a bit of this kind of city building stuff, if you want. And I said, let me stop you there. I don't care. Actually, the last thing I want to be doing is building a city. I don't care about cities. What I care about is one thing and one thing only, the social contract and Britain. And what do I mean by that? It's really simple. I want there to be the situation where you can work hard, and that means you can buy a house and raise a family. And at the moment, you can't do that in this country. It's not clear that you can do that if you follow that path. And that's it. That's why, for me, that's led to saying, okay, well, the only way to really solve that at scale, given all the other things and the myriad factors, is build a city, right? That might be the only thing that gets past all the NIMBYs, all the other issues that we've had, etc. But that's why I'm doing it. That's what's motivating me. And I don't care about repairing the social contract in other countries. I can explain it, but that's where I find myself placing myself in this moment. Right?
Is there not some part of you that would like to see a statue of you, a statue of Joe at the entrance to the forest city, like that river in Lord of the Rings where the two soldiers are holding their hands forward?
Do you know what that's called?
No, I've forgotten. I'm on air. I'm
and we have been pulled up. We have been pulled up on this before
for not knowing our Lord of the Rings.
For not knowing our Lord of the Rings.
You've got the calendar.
Tell us.
No, I don't know. I promised a man on Twitter that we wouldn't make this mistake again, but we have done so. So I can only apologise. I do wonder, Shiv. I mean, it's striking, right? That this problem of house building has built
They
up.
are the Argonath. They stand on either side of the river Andurin.
There you go.
I just remembered.
The answer to that, by the way, is no way. Please, God, no. We need more monuments, but definitely not to us.
But it's an interesting situation where you have these house prices that have been massively inflated, right? That demand that seems to be because you can't get more supply. Demand has been juiced. 50-year mortgages, 1% mortgages, whatever. More and more people. Let's give them cash to buy. House prices are massively inflated. Is there a way out of this situation where that doesn't result in a big housing crash? Because it seems to me, for many people, myself as an unpropertied Zoomer,
Long may that continue.
long may I continue to line Tom's pockets. But it seems, what's the incentive for me not to say I'll accelerate? I'm actually going to become the biggest NIMBY. I'm going to leave you older chumps, with vast debt, and then when the house prices crash, I'll be able to reap the rewards.
I mean, it's very simple. You have to live in a house, and you've only got a certain amount of time where you can live, right? And raise a family and be productive in that sense. So you have a biological clock, and so does your prospective partner. Oh, you have a girlfriend, of course.
It has been mentioned on the podcast. Jessie is real.
So
But she goes on a different podcast.
Everyone's on a clock, right? And so, sure, do you want to hold out on some kind of very low, high risk chance that it does go your way, and you've gambled and great. I was a NIMBY and everything crashed in my favor. That's not a great strategy, right?
Well, there goes my plan. I guess I'll have to be a YIMBY then.
I want to press you, Shiv, on how you're going to negotiate the planning system. A friend of the show brings up, I quote, the shakedown merchants at the CPRE, which is the countryside charity, and the RSPB, etc. So how are you going to ensure they don't add prohibitive costs to the whole exercise?
I think this is the beauty of building a city, because it requires a development corporation, right? No one would think otherwise.
So the development corporation can say, like, F off, Bird Brothers, we're not going to put your stupid bricks in our city.
They're made of wood, the woodpeckers. Or,
yeah.
Shiv, have you thought about
Stop
that?
pecking our skyscraper.
So this is, a development corporation is quite an authoritarian tool, right? It should not be used lightly. And anyone who's studied these things knows, okay, what does it do? So it has two things it can do. It can compulsory purchase land. So it can force people to sell what's theirs. That's a hideous thing if you're kind of an English libertarian, if you want, right?
Does that include at the sort of, if there was planning permission on it, price, or is it just at the sort of flat agricultural land price?
It gets sort of complicated for different setups, but yes, it excludes kind of hope value, and it says at the point at which, depends on, either the development corporation was set up or the scheme was announced, right? That's the value of the land. So it sort of excludes uplift value forced by people going, oh, look, they're going to build something great here. No, that doesn't really work, right? But the main point is that you're forcing people to sell. And sometimes that's just necessary in society, right? You want to, which they didn't really do well with, obviously, HS2. But the second part is, and they definitely didn't do this with the HS2 scheme, is it also has planning powers. So we can buy what we want and we can basically build what we want. Except it is limited. How is it limited? In two ways also. By time, so only for a certain amount of time, and it's by geography. So it's redlined. So you kind of have to know what your plans are in vast detail before you get the legislation through. It's basically a giant, planning exercise, but it's given to the Secretary of State to then create this legal entity and get it done. Now, when did we last do this at scale? Was the Olympics. That was great, right? A piece of land, Europe's largest fridge mountain, but some people live there, right? Not many, but there was an estate. There was also
Was there a campaign to save the fridge mountain?
No, there was no campaign to save it. There was a very vociferous campaign to save the estate, which turns out was still livable and no one lives there because the people were forced out, right? And it turns out the plans changed and et cetera, as some people have regarded it as kind of good housing, it's sort of 1960s kind of estate, right? So, but we got the Olympics. As a national enterprise, we all knew we had a deadline, and we were all going to do it. We weren't going to give up on the Olympics because someone wanted to keep that list the fridge mountain as grade 2 or whatever.
Standing athwart the fridge mountain, yelling "Stop!"
So we did it, right? And that was something we swallowed, and we did it really quickly. Right, the legislation I think took 9 months end to end to get through Parliament. And that was complex legislation; it wasn't simple. And then we basically kind of cleared the site and had spades in the ground to start building properly within a kind of year and a half. So it can happen quickly when we want it to. It's all in our minds.
There's an interesting point there, right? That is when you want to, and it requires the. It requires the polity, whatever you want to call it, the public to recognise that, maybe not recognise, but people at least at the top to say, this is what we are going to do. And HS2 is an interesting one where you're sort of, you're trying to wend your way between conflicting forces, and no one is quite willing to say, no, this is necessary.
I'm no expert in HS2, and there's been many post-mortems already. It's not even finished building yet. So there are people more expert than I. But as I've understood it, what they missed was the second part of that, which is they didn't have the planning. It wasn't a single planning authority, right? So it went and had to seek planning permission from all these individual councils and effectively liaise with all the parishes along the way, which is why you end up with these horrible compromises where bat tunnels are created at 125 million and no bats are going to be saved. There are no more bats, right, by this scheme. That's what you'd really want, right? Give the 125 million to the Bat Conservation Trust. And great, they'll create even more bats somewhere else or even close by. But, this is why you end up with these kind of ridiculous compromises. But yeah, I maybe didn't answer your question there properly.
No.
But yeah, you have to structure these things, and you're right. When there is vociferous will, these things get built. I think that maybe it was just a problem of kind of the Tories, if you want, right? Whereas their constituencies is in the places where you'd want to do a lot of this infrastructure building, and it's difficult if you're an MP to say, yes, I'm part of the government that's doing this to my constituents. It's just very practical kind of political problems on that basis.
So now we're in the part of the cycle where you hammer the cities.
Yeah. Well, no, it's where you realise that you're Labour and these aren't your natural constituents, presumably in some way or another.
So you go back to the countryside, you force all the Tory country squires to just suck it up.
Well, this is the very obviously cynical way of looking at it all, but what's remarkable is, again, just going back to the people on the ground, they don't want things to remain the same either. We think there's some massive division between, city, town, and village folk, sure, in the way that they live their lives and different points of their life cycle, but they all know, by and large, the country's is doing terribly.
You go outside
they
London.
agree on that.
You go outside London, and I think people, many of our listeners are in London, but it is extremely, we've thrown this word around a lot in the past, but I think it's not misapplied here, but radicalizing, that you go to towns and villages around the country and you see just how poor and just how much worse the quality of life is in these places, even compared to, the most expensive city in the world to live in. you're still better off being here because it is a difficult and small life in many places, and that's not. This is coming from a man who instinctively wants to love the countryside, but a lot of these towns are not nice places.
No,
But it's not just deprivation, right? I think that often these places are inhabited by people who feel not only are they poor, but they're also locked out of having any share in how the country is governed. They vote for things like Brexit, and then Westminster tries to frustrate them. They don't want the country to change the way it has, and it happens anyway. Like the disenfranchisement, I think at this stage is kind of off the scale. So you can sort of understand, I think, why in comment sections underneath articles there is skepticism about big projects now. People feel they can't trust the government to build it in their interests.
Yeah, I commented this on X recently, which is, one recurring comment, which was the most depressing for me. Yes, there was how many mosques there are going to be in this city, right? That came up again and again.
What is the answer?
The heart of the city, there will be a church that's already existent, extant. They're all grade 1 listed, obviously, and that will be the center of everything. But of course, there will be many other faiths that are entitled to build their own places of worship. That's the answer. So, how many mosques? Yes, fine. And then, of course, there's the other set of comment again, repeated again and again and again. Oh, of course, all the immigrants are just going to move in. The government will put them all there. That's what the city will become. It's so depressing, right? Just instant cynicism. But then the worst one was. And this is the one that I objected to the most, which is we failed on HS2, right? We can't build a railway line. How could we possibly do anything else, right? We can't possibly build a city. And you think at that point, like if that is the mentality of just a good number of, granted, these are Telegraph readers, but repeated on X. So it seems like a wider trend. Let's just pack it all in. Let's just quit. Shall everyone quit? Should we only ever do the smallest possible thing because we're afraid that we'll fail again, right? It comes back to kind of earlier comments we were in our conversation, right? We've got to keep failing, right? It sounds weird to say, but you've got to keep failing. If you're not failing, you're not trying. You're not experimenting hard enough. You're not pushing the boundaries. So of course, but if people's capacity to accept any kind of failure is so reduced to the point they're completely broken and cynical about their nation, that's a massive problem.
There are only two responses, I think, to the cancellation northern leg of HS2, and one is to become a gloom cell, and the other one is to become an Anglo-futurist, which is, we're accused of being kind of lame and twee and all that, but you basically have to choose one of those two.
Yeah, you could double down, right, and just go. I mean, it was
very radicalizing for me.
Yeah. I think it in part was sort of radicalizing. I felt like I was already radicalized. I was just very lonely, sitting in the corner going, "Why?" Because I could read those numbers right from so long ago. But again, I think that's why when I make those calls to people and I'm like, hey, I want to build a city, and I'm expecting, well, who's this nutter? I'm just going to hang up now. Instead, they go, oh my God, it's a brilliant idea. That's exactly what we need to do. And
there's an interesting point there about, because we can't do this assumes a very centrally directed plan, and that Britain is kind of one unitary body that acts or doesn't act or fails, right? That it seems sad not to allow, in the nicest possible way, an absolute lunatic sitting opposite me, to have a go, to have a go. And if this falls apart, then what a folly it will make. And what a glorious folly it will be to an attempt, to an effort to try, rather than to just say, let's just give up.
Right, but you have to be in a really comfortable place to accept that follies can happen. That we just don't have the capacity for that anymore, right? And that's really sad, and it's very dangerous and worrying for all sorts of things, including at the higher end, things like innovation and progress and productivity, right? Productivity is a result of a bunch of failed experiments, and you find the one that works that just improves life just that little bit better, right? They're usually not just massive leaps.
I think you're right. We've been boondoggle maxing and we're very short on follies.
Follies are beautiful. Follies are some of the most interesting things to go visit, right? You're like, aha, let me tell you the story of this ridiculous folly, and it's still there, and people go visit it, right? So,
which is an interesting point because HS2 will never be a folly because it can't really be allowed to be a folly. It will be sort of forced to become something. But you can't ever fully fail if you're the government, and you can't ever seemingly, well, I mean, to this argument about let's just build the Glasgow rail, like you can't really ever fully succeed. You're trapped in this twilight zone of mediocrity.
Right. And people can think the way they think, but they're not there to make the decisions. But they form that background, that milieu, if you want, to use that French word.
We use Anglo-Saxon derived words only.
Oh gosh.
Derived? Oh god.
First Basseljet, now using French words. It's I should get out. I should leave. And that background it seeps into the people at the top making the decisions. And I know because I've been speaking to them, it's just there, it's persistent. And it's, HS2's been a disaster for that reason. And again, it wasn't long ago when we had the Olympics delivered, not on budget, granted, but definitely on time. No one thought it could be delivered on time. It has to be delivered on time. And it was an extraordinary success and galvanized the nation. For right or wrong, people might do a post-mortem on it and go, oh, it's all twee, and why were we celebrating the NHS so much, and et cetera, et cetera. But it did, at the time, it worked. And it does get, and if you go there and
it was a great vibe. I was battery swapping in the bowels of the Excel Centre.
Great.
Were you? It was a very exciting time. To be, young Londoner.
Yeah, and even before that, the Millennium, right, was you had the Millennium Dome. It's still there. It was supposed to be like temporary structure.
And the London Eye.
I remember
the London Eye,
the dome as well, and it was similarly like quite a heady moment.
It was a heady moment. I remember I'm a millennial, right? But I'm like right there. How it was described was that you would come of age at the Millennium, and that was me. I became 18 at that moment, and I remember celebrating that New Year's on Millennium Bridge. I think it was. Is that right? It's definitely on a bridge, and I think it was that. And I got to see the fire, and it was an extraordinary moment. I thought, brilliant. We can do anything. No one doubted that. Right? It's a question
like
of
things
what
are
we
moving
would
forwards.
do, right? Absolutely, and what we would do. And some of it would be follies, and the Millennium Dome was ridiculed at the time. It was like, oh, it's a big tent, it was temporary, how ridiculous. It's still with us, right?
Well, I look back on it and I think it was kind of hubristic, and it was a very ugly design. So the thing that I look back fondly on is like not the dome itself, but more
the vibe.
Yeah, the vibe that suffused the country, or that seemed. I mean, I was very young then, so.
Although you say it's very ugly, but I think there's some value to the idea that you can do it, and I mean, the kind of early 2010s Doctor Who style architecture of, say, like Westminster. Is it Westminster Station that has the very like.
Blair core.
Kind of, big concrete with big metal beams across it, right?
I was meaning Star Wars
exactly, right?
Or one of those Jubilee line
Southwark,
stations,
which has just got listed, right?
Well, exactly.
No.
And I think we shouldn't totally put it. It's an interesting, like, it happened, but then you've got to be able to move past it, right? Every generation has to have the opportunity to do its own
make
thing.
its mistakes.
I mean, this comes to a big point about aesthetics, but just on that, I
don't think new generation should be allowed to do their own architecture.
Tom, having had his millennium period, is now happy to root that.
I remember I had an opposite experience to Southwark, but I remember when it was opened and I was riding up that escalator out of that very famous kind of opening, and you kind of, Southwark is not a major tube station. It is, yes, in London in Zone 1, but I remember it just feeling incredible and just extraordinary to have come up this escalator and open up into an atrium, and that feeling of like pride in public infrastructure, right? Everyone can travel on this tube. You don't need a first class ticket. You can't even buy one if you wanted to. And this is what the built environment for the public was right here, and it was impressive. And I'd just come from, Moscow. I'd done a trip there where they, they're like kind of small opera houses, each tube station. So they really went over the top because that's all they could basically spend their money on. They couldn't spend it on commercial goods, could they? Anyway, if they wanted to. So I had the opposite reaction, but you're right. People again make mistakes, and when in the built environment, you pay for them for a lot longer than with most other things.
Don't we know it in South London?
And maybe this comes back to that point about, what does the city really kind of look like, right? What's the aesthetic? And here's the kind of intellectual heart of this argument. Prince Charles, I just ordered his book.
The King.
Prince Charles at the time wrote a book, obviously now.
Is it Harmony, which is on the shelf there, top right in gold?
Oh, I can't see it. No, it's a book about architecture, and it was written in 1989 or something. You'll have to pull it off your shelf.
Well, we've got Antarctica. Elon Musk, the biography,
okay,
and
Harmony.
then Harmony by
no,
H.R.
it's not that.
Prince
It's
of
different. Now I realize he's written more than one book. But it was on architecture, and it was around his kind of speeches in and around architecture. Famously, one of them was the Carbuncle speech, criticizing kind of modernist, brutalist architecture. Fine. And obviously, he was right at the heart of that trend of identifying a sense of placemaking and realizing, look, architects are just making statement buildings, and what happened to a sense of understanding your surroundings and context and adapting and within that, rather than trying to simply stand out from it, and therefore disrupting a sense of community. 100% right. And Poundbury obviously is kind of the emanation of a life work and a life set of thinking on that basis. And Leon Creer, the architect who passed away 5 months ago now, still remains, I guess, the epitome of that school, the new urbanism school. And I'm struggling with this because what is this? What is the style of architecture? And people are already pulling apart on this. Is it just some new futuristic style yet to be, in a sense, invented? But what are its principles? And what the hell? How do you reinvent a style of architecture? And obviously, Tom, your heckles all being raised by that suggestion and notion, because you experiment with it, and maybe you experiment and fail on a vast city scale, right? Okay, that's not great. And at the other extreme, it's like, well, okay, you must adopt and the new urbanist principles, which also means exactly being slavish to, and I would put it in those terms, the aesthetics, not just the placemaking stuff, but the exact aesthetics of the past. Now, if you're a futurist, that's deeply problematic, because what do we mean by being? I regard myself as a modern, right? Not a postmodernist, not a modernist, a modern. Going back to the kind of 1500s definition of that term, which is, for me, it's a belief that that term came about by Charles, another French guy. So you're gonna have to
No.
You don't okay.
Calum, his Huguenot ancestors rising in his blood.
I actually think the French might have something interesting to say.
Really? How are you finding it over here, Calum?
So it was
Go home, Calum. Go back to where you came from.
It was the guy who wrote Sleeping Beauty and a bunch of other tales and myths, Charles Perrault. So he was known as a poet, but also the writer of children's tales. And he stood up and he said, look, I think we've reached the point in history where we are now better than the ancients, right? And I'm calling us the moderns. And that caused huge furore, right? How could we possibly, America had been discovered and the printing press. So it's like, well, the Romans, the Greeks didn't know about this entire other continent, right? So surely we must have be better than them. And that was the huge fight that occurred. But it gave us that term, the moderns, right? And what does it mean to be a modern? It means that it's the belief that the future is better than the past. It's just a belief, though, because as we know, it isn't just true. There is no singular, direct, arc of progress that's all dandy and good. For the last 15 years, we've lived with stagnation, and we've ended up where the next generation for the first time in 150 years is worse off than the generation before that. It's never happened in economic modern history that that's the case, but we're living through it right now. So to believe in modernity is to believe that the future will be better than the past is now something that you must actively participate in that belief, right? It's not just, well, it will happen regardless of whether I believe it or not. It's not. We must renew that belief, right? So to have an aesthetic that is slavish to the past, taking it back to that, is really awkward, right? It's really awkward.
Are there any towns or cities elsewhere in the world, though, that you look at and think might look a bit like Forest City would? This is a question from Claire, a robust listener of the show.
There's plenty of cities I'm in love with. There's, obviously there's sort of Paris and Prague for its Gothicism, where I lived for a while. I lived in Zurich. I see the design principles of it, aesthetics maybe far less so. Italy has a harmonious way of building with nature, which I appreciate. And they have
what's the stone? What's the stone in Cambridgeshire that you might use to build?
Well, you
might not be enough of it
in Cambridge, right?
Okay.
No, they have stone, and you have as you go through kind of to Norfolk, they have very specific ways of taking huge sort of pebbles and cementing them into the wall. So you get that effect. And so there's plenty of things to draw upon, certainly for inspiration, if you wanted to, again, emulate or reinvent what is there, right, with reference to the place, right, as opposed to this could have just been built in, as an extension of Dubai, right? So definitely wanted to go. But for me, it's more, I'm still at the sort of intellectual level of, okay, how do you bring back beauty, right? And if you want the technical term, it's kind of decoration, right? That's the thing that the modernists threw out first. They're like, that belongs to the old world, which we destroyed with, 2 world wars, right? We can't, and it's not just because it was just cheaper to make in factories, right? We should remember that there was an intellectual element to that of reinventing the world, and decoration was part of the past, right? So how do we bring back decoration? Because, the new urbanists are right about that. It is massively appealing to the eye to have not just the simple organic form, but the complexity and those human elements that remind us of, it's kind of almost like a proof of life, right? Because they're flaws. And those flaws are appealing to the eye in many ways.
Sure. Yeah. But part of that intellectual rejection, right, was that it requires human hands to be making those designs. That the nature of something handmade is that ornamentation is almost the inevitable consequence of that hand-making process. And the moment that you can start producing things in factories, and I hate the term, but I think people who dismiss it too quickly are wrong, is that it becomes pastiche, right? Because it becomes an industrialized process of ornamentation, which is very different to a genuine decoration that comes from that, as you say, that people living there and produce and proof of life.
The craft of human hands and experience, right? Yeah. And okay, so speaking to someone from Monumental Labs today, and they're doing exciting things. What you really want is to have deeply complicated algorithms to program that accept the irregular and a bit of dysfunction to what would otherwise be just a very machine printed symmetry, right? Can we emulate it, or is it just not genuine enough, right? It's not been touched by human hands. We don't have that sense of proof of life, right? In an age of AI, I think it's going to be very important. David Galbraith talks about, to step back slightly, he's an architect, trained architect who worked with David Foster briefly, but is also a VC and technologist. And he talks about, getting those pattern books together, where you're employing AI to, and we all know this, right? You can create multiple pictures, right? Again and again and again in different forms in infinite variety, right? So how do we gel those two things to create pattern books with infinite variety in many senses, but yet have harmony, a sense of visual and design harmony. These are complicated things, but we've been blessed with new tools, and new tools, form follows function. The new tools will create new expressions into the world, and that's what's exciting about it.
I'm intrigued by your talking to more monuments, who for listeners' benefits are, I think they're an American startup whose thesis is that there are not enough monuments in modern life, and that our predecessors were very good at building massive statues, that kind of thing, and they want to bring this culture back. So I'd love to know what exactly you've been discussing with them.
It was a very brief conversation. I mean, people keep saying, "Oh, you got to speak to X person." You keep getting that, obviously. And so, Monumental Labs was one of those startups that's really caught a trend.
And they do AI sort of carving,
and so they kind of laser
ornamented stone.
Yes, exactly. And so, how do you machine produce ornamental stone at scale? Because it has been possible actually technologically, but they're trying to do it in a bit more exciting way. Again, cities are repositories for those things. You were we were semi-joking. What are the Tolkien-esque statues? What are they called? Tom. Supposed to have them had. You're supposed to memorize this by now. Third time lucky? Not clearly.
No. It's the Anduin River, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is the Anduin River.
Yeah, but what are the statues
called?
What are the statues called?
Oh, come on, guys. Let's get on with the show. River statues.
Do we, it seems, I don't know, you tell me.
The Argonath.
Okay, there we go. Let me ask you the question and turn it around. Does it seem like we could be in a moment where you have, there are people contributing, because no one's getting paid, by the way, to do this. We haven't raised anything. And if we are paying anything, it's just literally I put in a couple of grand.
So you're just doing this in your spare time out of...
Well, it's now become basically my full-time job at this point. But yes, in essence, yes, it's supposed to be my a side hobby. It's taken over, which is great. But there are people who are contributing to this who would be founders of this city in effect, right?
Yeah.
Without their efforts, this wouldn't exist. Should they be celebrated? How do you is it just name a street after them, or is it do you create a statue?
Right? So Lord Investy has a historic opportunity.
I'm going to get in so much trouble. Thanks, Tom. No, I mean more, okay, or what do you name the forest? So someone said, why, obviously you'd name it after the greatest naturalist of the 20th century and possibly of the 21st, David Attenborough, right? How do we,
I was thinking
Attenborough.
I was thinking Durrell.
Gerald Durrell.
Gerald Durrell, yeah.
Well,
and then you name the brothels after his brother Lawrence.
Yes. So it's a repository to then commemorate and celebrate. Those sacrifices that often get unnoticed otherwise, right? And just flow under the radar. And it seems like we've lived in certainly a moment where, you wouldn't do that. Why would you put up a statue to, this person or that person? That seems terribly antiquated or ancient. But possibly it's just a function of the fact that we just not built anything new, right? And, therefore, how would you even commemorate or celebrate those people?
But we've had this big historic project that you've talked about to essentially erase much of our cultural history.
With reference to, sorry, go on.
The post-war intellectuals who decried traditional architecture and lots of other parts of high culture. And perhaps one manifestation of that is that we don't really build statues anymore. In fact, we're more likely to want to tear them down. But to me, this seems a slightly inhuman way of...
I wouldn't say that they also decried not monumentalizing human experience. There's certainly, brutalists have their own sculptors, if you want. So they're not... That I don't think necessarily matches up. What you can say.
Well, you could have a big Lenin, sure.
Yeah, also that, right? I mean, there's whole sections of disused bits of Moscow, right, filled with the monumentalism of the past, of the very recent past, in a sense. They're also unlucky that they kind of ended up with kind of concrete that was really poor and just didn't weather very well, right? They just picked bad materials, alongside obviously then removing decoration. But I think they're to be applauded, by futurists for trying something. And, you know, even if you go to the South Bank, you don't like the outside, you can't say that the inside is not well thought out, not well designed, and there's a lot to love there, right? Again, most, you know, brutalist buildings look terrible to, I think, are now, you know, 21st century tastes, but actually go inside them, they put loads of thought, and the aesthetics can be really appealing. So there's something to love, but we should applaud them for trying, because, you know, that's our job.
Well, yeah, and I think we are too quick to criticize these things, as you say, right? That you have to do it, but then be willing to destroy it. And I mean, the Japanese are very good at this, in that they refuse to list many things. And there was a tower in Tokyo that was a sort of monument to this that has now been destroyed. And there was a kind of fledgling effort to save it, which had a central core, and then flats would be bolted onto it. And the idea was you could bolt on flats, and then they would be, you know, when they would become antiquated, they would be torn off, and new ones would be put on with new designs. I mean, a failure in the design meant that actually once you bolted them on, they couldn't be removed, and so the whole thing fell apart. But it does seem that if you're brave enough, mistakes are less damaging because you can just have another crack at it, and that is the spirit that we've failed to keep on.
And you know, I was just digging through who should be our futurist champion architects and the like, who retained a tradition of decoration, but also had a sense that the future would be better than the past, right? Do we have any of those people? You kind of look at the Art Deco or Art Nouveau movements, and for me, that really is like the it's after that moment then decoration is removed, right? But those really summate. They become the kind of pinnacle of both futurism and decoration, right? And I mean that in the technical term, and because it gets often mixed with kind of just being twee. I don't mean that at all. And we have our own heroes on that basis, right? You know, Glasgow's full of buildings that are fascinatingly built by Charles René Mackintosh. He should be a hero. He should be a friend of the show. Or there's the arts and craft movement as a whole, and perhaps William Morris, right? Maybe a bit too romantic for my taste.
Well, I think that is an interesting point, because you said about how, you know, you need the element of randomness for something to be beautiful. Like the Morris prints are not necessarily random, and actually they are produced at mass scale, and yet people really enjoy them. I think it's too easy to say that it's an element of randomness that requires it. I do wonder whether there is some element that we've actually lost the ability, or at least elites have lost the ability, to actually even know what beautiful things look like. We've such an atrophied sense of beauty and of aesthetics that actually any attempt to kind of restart this process hits up against, well, we're having to basically reinvent this field from scratch. We take a lot of inspiration from the past. It doesn't really work. People dislike it. So you know that's banished for another couple of years. I wonder, how do we get back to a period where, you know, it was even coherent to say a Georgian building or an Edwardian building, that whole process of the old being replaced with new styles has just fallen apart.
I know. People look, think, oh well, the past is just the Victorian building, and maybe they go, okay, well, oh yeah, also Georgian, and then you get knowing all these other past architectural styles, right? You know, Jacobean, Tudor, Gothic. The list kind of really does go on, and you kind of we'll just ignore all of that, and because we want to constrain it to the last kind of 200 years. It shouldn't be sufficient. These are all part of, by the way, English history, right? Sometimes imported from France, amongst other places.
Basil Jett did fantastic work on Shaftesbury Avenue and Northumberland Avenue, and he is our houseman, and he does not get enough credit for it.
And I think, again, comes from a lack of confidence, right? When you're really confident as a nation, of course you re-embrace anything and mix it up and not feel worried about any of it, at least at the intellectual end. And we're definitely not having those debates and arguments. And, again, but you need a place for those debates to be meaningful, right? You need a place to instantiate those ideas at the end of the day. Which is also why, by the way, we've kicked off this design competition. And, most people, in our day and age, almost everything is communicated visually, right? And it's also why I've deferred, from kind of painting a vision of what this city is through those images. Because people they look at an image and they go, okay, I don't like this, right? or I do like it, and that's it. And that's the end of the debate. So,
but you can tell it'll smell great.
Yeah, right. Does it pass the literal scratch and sniff test? So, in that sense, we know we have to engage on that basis in order to engage the public more widely, right? There's only so much you can talk about kind of community land trusts and special economic zones and yes, Lord Vesti, before people disengage. And you need to say, okay, this is what it looks like. So we've launched this, and this is very much, Joe's forte, along with Thomas Hogg, working with some amazing judges, including the cultural tutor. That was a big win.
Huge.
By the team. Yeah.
Huge.
So they're going to be judging this design competition. What is it for? It's for a lamppost, right? We've obviously got a whole city to fill, and part of filling it is the street architecture. A lamppost is actually pretty complicated, it turns out. Running the spec for a lamppost is very complicated, but you can find the details on the site. So it's forestcity.uk. And it's open, really. We've tried to make it as open for people who just want to mess around on Mid-Journey, or even, God help us, kind of ChatGPT in a sense. Images aren't great. Or at the other end, if you're a proper product designer, great. Let's see your ideas, and if you really know how to spec this stuff out properly, then you get extra points.
What if they clash? What if someone wants to do, I don't know, sort of wooden yurt post box, and someone else wants to do like a beautiful wrought iron gas lamp?
Could I add on to your point there, which is if you've got multiple different visions, at what scale does the difference happen? Like, is the whole city going to be one different form? Are you going to allow people at the individual level to modify the houses of their own? I mean, I feel I've made my own opinion here. Are we going to have new great estates that will allow, some form of neighborhood coherence?
Prodigy houses.
Well, Wait, so you saying, Calum, that the aristocracy should be given more power? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Look, none of that's been decided. I guess formatively, you'd really want to have some kind of a grammar book, right? As I kind of mentioned, or pattern book, where you go. Now, Poundbury has been very prescriptive. They said, these are the 16 paints you can use. That's actually all you can do, right?
So good.
No, it's this is the thing I actually disagree with on Poundbury. I think it's horrible that once you have a house,
there's too much freedom too.
Well, France. Okay, so I keep going back to France. I don't know why. Maybe this is making me suspect as a prospective member of the Anglo Futures Club. So, oh dear.
Franco Futures was that way, mate.
Yeah. But again,
hard vacuum.
They are not libertarian in this way. Actually, many people on the continent are not libertarian in this way. You must, if you paint your house a different colour in large parts of Scandinavia, you are shunned from the village. You can't do it.
Sensational. Ile de Ré, yes. where I spent some time recently, has, I think, an incredibly limited style book with sensational results. They do new builds, and they look like they've been there for 200 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's... and I feel like sometimes that really descends into, what's the coast of California where the mayor was Clint Eastwood. It's Carmel, I think it is.
I've actually been to Carmel.
Right, and
I enjoy it, but I know everyone thinks it's tacky.
Well, it's a tyranny, right? Because you arrive there and at 7 o'clock at night, they switched off all the street lights. Why? Because it's a bunch of old people and they said, I don't want the street lights interrupting my sleep, right? Because they go to bed really early and that's it. Now you're driving around and you're literally crashing into everything and it's only 7:15. It's ridiculous, right? You can have these kind of petty tyrannies pop up everywhere. And so you don't want to descend into that. So how do you manage that, broker that?
I say the more tyrannous, the better.
Shut up. Shut up.
If you're trying to be a city at city scale, you clearly, what you do have is room to let things be different in different places to an extent, right? It doesn't all have to be Haussmannian style Paris, right? You have neighborhoods, and England and London, right, is brilliant at having, these quite varied neighborhoods. Some of them obviously don't work, some of them do. I find many of them, where I grew up in Finchley, I find it disgustingly twee. I hate it from an architectural point of view. It's all 1930s. I can't stand it. Whereas, I've also lived in, parts of Pimlico and, Islington and now Homerton and, there's lots to love and hate and be disgusted with and fall in love with. But they have neighborhoods, right? And they all have distinct characters. And that's what a city allows you to do.
And how do you maintain that? Because it does, your point about Carmel is interesting, right? Because that is the product of the demographics of the sort of the people and the fact that, you make this point about people getting older. We are in a situation where there are fewer young people. Young people will have less ability to drive this. Soho is open less late because there are fewer young people. The great estates exist because there are a few people who can make these design decisions. What's your model for creation of neighborhoods? What does it take to make somewhere new with a fairly arbitrary line drawn on the map to separate them? What's the plan to make that a place and somewhere that remains separate from somewhere else that is right next to it?
My expertise doesn't run over any of this, right? I am in very traditional English sense, just an amateur. I'm not even a gentleman amateur. I wouldn't elevate myself that high. But there are people who have been doing this for 30 years who are, working with us already, including some of the people who did, the King's Cross development, et cetera, who pioneered things like co-design, which means also, working with existing residents to create something beautiful. So yes, you have that element of, okay, well, maybe these choices are put together by a professional, but informed by people who already live there. That's one form of architecture. Another form would be very much the kind of Patrick Schumacher of this world, right? We've got a very new way, parametric styles of doing things, and parametricism should take over and be the organic style, and you get this free-flowing sort of Zaha Hadid stuff. And it's amazing. I mean, the world's greatest place to swim on the planet has got to be the Olympic swimming pool. It's definitely on that top 10 list. It's astounding. So all of these things have appeal. I don't have a rule book yet, and we shouldn't have a rule book yet. And this is what I keep talking to the hundreds of volunteers who are in our WhatsApp group. All, as I said, with they're all pretty cracked. They have amazing professional set of skills. It's astounding. But my job is to remind them, look, we just got to do these very practical things. They're pretty boring, and this stuff is lovely to discuss, but it's not useful yet.
But does it not fall apart in the committee, right? You need a vision. You need someone who can, you need a Houseman, you need a Bazalgette.
No, the vision is...
You need to boot 90% of people off that WhatsApp group immediately.
The vision is for me, at least, the vision is the socioeconomic stuff, right? It's repairing that contract, right? The hope and the dream is you can deliver 400,000 homes that are actually, people can actually buy and raise a family. That's the hope, right? Now, what does that house look like? Because if it looks like, some awful brutalist home from, or the worst sort of, Barratt home that we built, of late, then sure, that's a failure of the project, which is why I've put in one of my expert groups is, okay, can we actually build it at, is it going to cost 200 grand to manufacture? Leave aside the groundworks cost, leave aside, the contractor's profit, blah, 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 just strip it down to its basics. Okay, and then can we take that and make that beautiful and highly functional from the inside? And so can we deliver a 4-bedroom house that then in the end will cost £350,000 in the southeast? I mean, so these things kind of come together.
Is there a problem that we're actually we've so rarely built houses that the ability to create a style or even aesthetics, like have a sense of aesthetics of what buildings should look like, you fall inevitably into hyper modern that not enough people appreciate, right? There's not enough excitement about this is a new building that captures the spirit of the age. And so it's hard to get the excitement that once the you get buy-in because it was modern. And there's a whole lot of people just reacting against that. Like, what will it take for a new style to be recognized as modern and exciting and aspirational, frankly?
I mean, look, that's a great question. Whatever it is, it certainly exists as some set of, by referencing the past, and we've got pretty bad at that, right? I mean, this is the negative side of, if you want, Poundbury and the new urbanism movement. There's lots of positives going for them, as I kind of mentioned before, and their placemaking skills and their understanding of human scale, etc., etc. But when it comes to their aesthetics, they're very tightly bound to that past, and there's a lot going for our kind of recent modern history. William Morris, for example, should be, for me, that's personally a bit too kind of overly romantic in a sense. But then you have Charles René Mackintosh from Glasgow, who reinvented the Art Deco style for the British, right? He should be, a friend or a hero of the show, really, in many ways. Embracing the future, but also embracing, strictly speaking, kind of decoration. But it's more than that, right? It's about beauty and it's about inventiveness, playfulness, in a kind of, very typical kind of Scottish way. So it's slightly reserved, but it's meant to not just enliven. There is, I find there to be a little bit of humour through it, but it is so damn stylish. You can't escape, and it's so distinctive. You know that it's Charles René Mackintosh as soon as you see it, right? And these things are perhaps beyond, in a sense, the wit of us three sitting here, because what is it that makes it distinctly Charles René Mackintosh? If you elongate the back of a chair so much so that suddenly you know who it is, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of a little bit confounding and magical. But what you really need, and what this city then therefore allows, is you can conceptualize all you want and you can be brave about doing that. But until you have a place, a repository, if you want, for these ideas to really emanate and manifest, then it's all for naught. So hopefully this unlocks all of that.
And speaking of this place's identity, what are you going to call it?
Well, we don't... So the official project name is Forest City 1, right?
Which implies the existence of...
or possibly of a 2 and a 3 and a 4, right? And let that be so. And it'll come down to, the various business cases for if that works in, different parts of the country. It should do. But we're creating a template here which can be imported and replicated, or exported and replicated, I should say. But on the specifics of what this city should be called, that's also one of the things that people like to come up with, and it's fun, it's inventive, it's cool when people get very passionate about it, and there is a major point. We need to name this city pretty soon, because you can't really fall in love with Forest City 1. It's as dry as anything.
I think some of our listeners could.
Along with stakeholders and, and that kind of nomenclature.
You're not enthused by Shivton or something?
No, please God. It's Granta is the one that I like personally.
There's Grantchester Meadows in Cambridge. Is that the same kind of Grant?
The river is the River Granta. In fact, Cambridge was called Grantebruch originally in the Old English, and it became Cambridge. I don't know what the exact morphology of it all was, but that's what it morphed into. And then they renamed the river Cam, because they're like, it's Cambridge instead of Grantebruch or Grantebruch. And so we should call the river Cam. And so now sections of the river still called Granta, but the one going through it is called the Cam. But it shouldn't be called that. It should be called Granta, because that's the bridge over the river Granta. So, and of course you have, Granta magazine and, et cetera, et cetera. You have a bit of a lineage there. But so Granta seems the right name. To me.
Not Iceni, wasn't that been kicked around?
Iceni or, Boudica or, someone put forward Wessex, and I was like, oh, it can't, it's a county. I was like, but it, even though it doesn't exist, maybe you commemorate it like this. I say that seems wrong, because you can't call a town or city by a county name. But, let that be another thing maybe your listeners participate in.
I'm intrigued by what you say about exporting forest cities, because we see in places like Spain and France that once you're in the habit of building infrastructure, you can just continue doing it quite well. And we've fallen out of the habit, and now we can't build any. So I wonder whether that principle is applicable to building cities. And so if we build one city in the modern day, we might be able to build more. And I'm not lusting after a countryside kind of plastered with new cities.
No.
But we've talked about Dogger Bank on this show. And there are other places where, perhaps we could build things better. This seems to me to be like the true kind of added value that this city could unlock, just the ability to build cities again.
So, like yourself, you don't want 70% of England is, give or take, if I've got my exact numbers correct, is arable land, right? Then about 9%, just under 9, is actually built on. And so the rest is kind of lakes and waterways and moorland, right? Non-arable land. So that's how the kind of country divides in. So there's plenty of space if you wanted to do more of it. But no, we wouldn't. The object is not to just plaster everywhere, as people often have said about Forest City 1. Oh, this is the beginning of just concreting over the entire countryside. That's definitely not the objective here. But it is a model. And, we should remember that Britain has been a huge innovator in urban design, if you want to use the kind of the modern phraseology of that. For example, Central Park in New York, possibly the most famous park in the world, enjoyed by tens of millions, possibly, kind of each month, given the tourists. Was the creation, the inspiration behind that was in Liverpool, from a park in Liverpool in the Victorian era, which they thought, okay, well, this was a modern innovation. No one had thought, well, why don't we just
Wait, the Liverpoolians are claiming they invented the field.
Yeah. Well, it's a field in an urban space, if you want, right? And if you manicured that field just a little bit, then there you go. The public could just enjoy it and walk through it, right? It's not a square. It's an actual park, but in the middle of an urban zone.
It's a rectangle.
Yeah, well, Central Park certainly is. But and I think this is what makes it, the Garden City. Invented, conceptualized, if you want, by Ebenezer Howard, a journalist.
Famously putting journalists in charge of things works out very well.
Yeah, indeed. Once it was built, and it took him, I think, 20 years of a journey to eventually then put the money together in a time where we didn't have the Town and Country Planning Act, and you could just buy the land and build your own city if you wanted to, because you owned it. People from around the world came to visit. They were like, wow, what an innovation, right? We didn't know you could do this. And we were the progenitor of those ideas in the built environment. That's amazing.
You make that point about the 9% is urban and people, are alarmed by the prospect that this is going to go, much higher. I wonder if there's some level. Well, I think there's two parts to this question. One is, why are we not doing this in, say, Cambridge itself or London? Why are we not densifying? And many people have talked about this. But the other one is, what do we do about these towns that are, and I mean, this sounds provocative, but that are dying, right? In that, is there some world where, sorry, again, I'm suggesting my answer. This is the tail wagging the dog, but are we going to need to start also destroying cities? Like, how do we move as people are moving around to different places? How do we not leave the ruins of what we once were there, and reach some sort of equilibrium?
So let's take the densifying existing cities. That is the rational strategy. We should not, in that sense, if we were rational and able to just do what we think is rational, we should not be building Forest City 1. It doesn't make any sense from that perspective. The problem is that people live in Cambridge. There's 120,000 people who live there, and they have opinions. And they don't want things ultimately to be, even though they are probably one of the most pro-growth areas, as I kind of mentioned before, in the country. You try getting rid of that green belt, you're not going to win. Central government even hampers it. They've withdrawn the funding for the sewage works. Now, again, if you can't, what are you going to do if you can't? Where do you put your waste if you don't have a new sewage works that can handle more homes? So they're stuck. They're literally stuck on that basis. So there's all sorts of politics. Now add in a tram, right? Let's retrofit a tram into Cambridge's ancient, historic, medieval streets. How far and fast do you think that's going to go, and how expensive is it going to be? Retrofitting is incredibly expensive, right? To answer your second point, cities are organic things too. They just exist on longer scales, so they live and die. That is just true. I mean, we've seen it in my lifetime, peering over into America. Detroit has basically gone from a huge bastion of kind of middle-class wealth and prosperity sort of in the 1950s. Not that I'm that old, obviously. But, it sort of died to the point where, me and my friends, when we were a little bit younger, 15 years ago, were like, yeah, we could buy a whole factory for £1 or for $1, even cheaper. Brilliant, let's do it. And we could have, right? And that causes itself new renewal, right? So they die and they are reborn. Sometimes they just die entirely. Part of my job as a journalist was to go and visit some of the most deprived places in this country. Kind of Easington in Durham, and it's difficult to see, and the people there can't see how these things could ever come back. But then, you go to Stoke-on-Trent, and the investment that's been put into that place by the woman who runs one of the biggest betting companies in this country has been astounding. Tom Forth, also presumably a friend of the...
He is indeed.
The show.
Although whether he would say the same thing about us.
He keeps his own counsel in many senses. But he pointed out, obviously, the huge investment that's gone into there has transformed that place. And again, 20 years ago. So these things have cycles, and we should accept that much at least.
Yeah. And I think you bring up, Denise, what was her name? Denise Coates.
Denise Coates,
who, whilst a great philanthropist in some ways, in other ways, her mark on the high street has been somewhat more damaging, right? In that the presence of betting shops that have replaced a lot of these, the shops that places require to be livable. Like what does it take to with a hypothetical place create places that are not your Brewdog pub, that are it has a slide and it has a jukebox and it has an arcade machine, but actually will
the
always
works, the dessert shop.
Yeah, but will always be like a sort of children's play area rather than a place that people really live. And I wonder, feel free to tell me to shut up, that basically this stuff just happens, and trying to design it is actually the mistake that people make. Like what?
No,
What's the sort of
there's-
thinking on this?
So
What's the plan for charm?
Yeah, right. That's actually the very succinct way of asking all of that, right? So if you go to somewhere like even Stratford or Folkestone is probably the better example. So the person behind Folkestone's regeneration is Richard DeHaan. He put in 100 million and he created, as part of that, the artistic quarter. I think he started with that. So what did he specifically do to make that happen? The answer is the land was bought and he put it into a trust, and that trust rents those properties out at peppercorn rates, right? So, lower the rents, make it easy. Great. You can take chances and risks as the business, because you don't have to pay the rent at market rates, right? And that means you can also select who you put there and, fund creative, interesting, expressive, characterful businesses. So you walk into that artistic zone in Folkestone and it's amazing. It's wonderful. It's like, it's got charm. 100%. You can know it's undeniable. So you can manufacture some of that, right? But that doesn't seem quite sufficient to answer your question. And, maybe if you sort of take the pub, just walking through parts of London today and stumbling upon, pubs that are, probably 220 years old kind of thing. And that's just standard, right? It's amazing. And they've got all that character imbued into the very fabric of the set, where you're sitting, what you're looking at, the whole bar, the setup, the wood, the ironwork. It's just there. It's all around you. I don't quite know how to answer that bit, except that it will be a mixture of the people there. What is a pub if not the people sitting at the bar, ordering the drinks and having a merry time? And then, those businesses that arrive and decide to build something with character, not just physically, but from the people that they are, right? So that's the experimental part, that, where I tell you to shut up, it'll just happen, maybe, I guess. But it requires a little bit of magic, I guess. Yeah, it does.
Because it is an interesting, and I think it's a question that no one has yet answered, is, are people drinking less because beer's expensive and everywhere closes at 11? Or is it more fundamental? And I think, I at least think, I'm quite excited to see if this could be open. To what extent is the true spirit of the Englishman, bawdy alcoholic, still there after, despite efforts to suppress him?
Just to answer that question very briefly, in a sense, like economics is a kind of fundament to all of this stuff, right? So if people don't have disposable income, they don't then create a culture of fun, right? Of which drinking late and being slightly hedonistic is definitely part of it, right? You go to places where the demography is very different and young people do have disposable income. So, for example, I was in Colombia. So what's their nighttime activity, right? You might not agree with it, but their nighttime activity is to literally throw explosives, like we would throw an axe at the wall, like in a game. And that's what they do. And it's freaking great, right? It is definitely enlivening. And they do it with alcohol. So, and it's like a massive sense of like youth and dynamism. And that's what this city should definitely be about. And therefore the cost of rent makes a big difference. You've got disposable income or not, right? Can you create culture of fun or not? Because you can only do it if the economics are right.
Shiv, on that exciting note, aside from the youthful dynamism, perhaps we can wrap it up.
Dynamite.
We will deposit you in the field soon to be known as Granter, and we will wish you and Joe well with Forest City 1.
Thank you very much. I look forward to inviting you to that massively charmful pub that we've just recently opened.
Well, go on then. To sum up, Shiv, what should listeners, what should they do? What do they need to go and read? Well, how can they help?
Well, come and apply to the design competition if you're that way inclined. There are millions of tasks. If you have professional skills in almost any adjoining area that you can think of in around construction and building and designing a city, and cities are life, so they contain all of life. come and join the WhatsApp group, as Tom already derided, and it's forestcity.uk. Read in, be an advocate, help us, in part, yes, battle some of those NIMBYs along the way by showing that we've actually got that support. So there's plenty of things to get stuck into.
Well, best of luck, Shiv. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks.
We will send you back down the long wooden staircase of Babel, back down to earth. But thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.